Here we are on the north coast, where sporting legends are made. He needs this putt to advance to the next stage, but can he do it? The crowd are holding their breath. Can he cope with the pressure?
Dad, would you take the shot?
Yes!
Yay!
Well,
Hello and welcome to Guess Who's Talking with me, Linda Bryans. My guest this evening is a woman who's been described as Northern Ireland's first lady of journalism. Her career in broadcasting, reporting and writing has spanned many decades, and she's interviewed some of the most famous and most fascinating people in show business, entertainment and beyond. She is Anne Hailes, MBE. Anne, welcome to the programme. It's lovely to have you on.
Thank you.
That's quite a career.
That's quite an introduction. How do I live up to that?
First lady of journalism. Well, I wouldn't disagree with that.
No. Well, it's all just happened, Linda, you know. Having been kicked out of school at 15, doing shorthand typing course, and then in Ulster Television when I was 17, 3 weeks before going on air. And it's just been constant since then.
But you were behind the scenes in Ulster Television, weren't you?
I was a clerk typist, typing up all the films as they came into the film library, making a record of them. And then Gloria came down the corridor one day with a big reel of film and her clipboard.
Gloria Honeyford?
Yeah. And put her head round the door and she said, "Be there at 7:30, party, my flat, great." And I thought, that's what I want to do. I want to be a production assistant. So I kept applying, but I had the disadvantage, apparently, of being too young.
Oh.
But I kept at it until I did get a production assistant job with Derek Bailey, and that was my education, the minute I went into the studio.
What does a production assistant do, or what did a production assistant do in those days?
Well, type up the scripts, work out the timings, sit beside your director, call the shots, get the contract signed. One day getting Tom Jones' contract signed in his dressing room. We were very polite in those days, knocked on the door and Mr. Jones, would you mind signing this? Certainly, love, he said. Stripped to the waist, rabbit's foot sort of hanging from his waist for luck. And he was getting his makeup off. And I said, we'd just like to wish you well with your new record, which was Green, Green Grass of Home, and wish you well with it. And it'll do well because we think it's great. And he said, love, I'm going to enjoy it because I think it's a one-off. And every time I see him on The Voice, I think, hello, a one-off.
How wrong was he?
And he only gets better and better.
Wow. I want to talk about some of the amazing people that you've met in that career in a moment. But you started when you were 17 in Ulster Television, as it was then. And you met your husband there too, so you come out with more than a job.
Well, I left a job because I married him. They didn't approve of marriage within the company. And I went into PR because one of the boys who had worked in UTV Gordon Duffield opened his own company. And that again, that was the beginning of what I love to do most of all, writing. And writing handouts, organising conferences, things like that. So that was a terrific, it's all been like a sort of a roller coaster, which it really was. I was then invited to go in to do press and PR in the Arts Theatre with the Ulster Actors Company, which was writing all the programmes, organising press events, all that sort of thing. And then Brian Waddell in Ulster Television phoned and said, we'd like you to come in and front a programme. And I said, no, not into that at all. And he asked me again, and I said, not really, Brian, I don't think so. And he asked me a third time. He must have seen something that I didn't recognise. And I remember saying, I said, give me 24 hours. And remember in the kitchen, my husband who'd worked in UTV and was still there, I said, what do you think? He said, try it and see. My daughter was just about to start grammar school. And I said, Susie, what do you think? And she said, well, try it until Christmas. You know, September now. Do it till Christmas. If you don't like it, fine. And my son Michael, 2 years older, he was leaning up against the kitchen door with his arms folded. And he said, anyway, Mum, think of the money. And I thought, well, that's pretty good advice.
Practical
so
advice.
I said, okay.
Yeah, yeah. And you never looked back. So what did they bring you back to present at that time?
First of all, I presented a sort of what's on, which was live and what was coming up in Belfast. Then I teamed up with Jerry Kelly in a programme called Lifestyle. And then I was taken out of that to do a programme called Ask Anne. Oh, I'd worked in the BBC before that. I forgot about that one, where I did a programme called Ask Anne, right, which was talking to people and answering queries, all sorts of things. So Ask Anne has hounded me right along, right to newspaper days, because I had a page called Ask Anne. And then I said, you know, I was coming out of the station one day, coming back from Dublin, and there were a group of sort of young men holding up a wall. One said, oh, there's your woman, Ask Anne. Hi, Ask Anne. Hi, Ask Anne. And I thought, I'm not me anymore, you know. I'm just perceived as being this person. Yeah, so I said, no, let's give it a rest. And at that stage, UTV very kindly gave me 6 medical programmes to do. And 2 years to do it. And I thought, 2 years to make 6 programmes? And that time I was making one every week. But it took that time because all the medical doors just opened. You know, when you can say Ulster Television, as you know, doors open, absolutely, or BBC. Yeah. And those were called case notes, and they were very successful. And we were in operations and watching hearts being lifted out and lungs being dissected and a little baby being born by caesarean section. Yeah. I mean, it was an education, because when I came out of school, I'd enjoyed it, but they didn't see any future for me in school. And I began learning, and I'm still learning. Yeah,
that's a great motto to live by. Just going back before that, I mean, you alluded to in school there, and you told me one time that you didn't meet your father until you were about 4.5 years old.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, Daddy left to go to war, basically, 2 weeks before I was born. It was a terrible thing for my mother and father, because apparently they said to Daddy, you can go 2 weeks before the date or 2 weeks after the date. And think of the dilemma. They decided he would go before I was born, because it would be harder for him to leave. So he went to India. He didn't know he had a daughter and I was 3 months old before he even knew. And I remember so well the day he came back, and we were so shy of each other and adored each other. But, you know, it really was only when I knew he wasn't going to last much longer, I was able to say, you know, Daddy, I love you.
Yes.
And that was very important.
Yes.
And that's something I learned in the theatre days, because people come and go very quickly in theatre. So there's no time for small talk. You really get into it. And people will say, I love you. And they don't mean I'm in love with you. They're saying, I really love your company. I love the crack. I love the whole thing we've been through. And it's easy now to say, I love you.
Yes, it's much easier now. And people say it so much freer than they would have done back in
but you still
those
have
days.
To mean it before you say it.
Yeah. Let's talk about some of those people. So you already talked about Tom Jones opening his dressing room door, stripped to the waist, and you managed to get out intact as well.
But you see, we didn't think he was a glamorous. He was a very attractive. No. We were very innocent in those days, Linda. I mean, really, at my age, and all the boys I worked with were all local boys, and we moved as a unit. Some of them are working here today. Yeah. And they always minded the girls. And then there was the ones who were a bit older, and they went for dinner parties and whatever else. We went down to Browns Bay and had a picnic at night, and it was great. So they were innocent days. So you called Tom Jones Mr. Jones. You were respectful to him, but you didn't think, oh, core. I'd love to go for dinner with you. Not at all.
But somebody thought, oh, core, when they saw you, Harold Robbins?
Oh, Harold Robbins. Yeah. The author of The Carpetbaggers, which was a very, very big novel, a very naughty, racy novel. And he chased me around the building. Now, I was only, 20, I suppose. And he caught up with me and he said, I want you to come and have dinner. And I said, no, I'm sorry, I can't. And he said, I want you to come and have dinner with me tonight. And I said, I'm sorry, I'm going to visit my Auntie Joan in hospital. And he said, you can visit your Auntie Joan anytime. And I said, I'm going to visit my Auntie Joan in hospital. And he got the message. Now, he married apparently 5 or 6 times. He left every wife £1 million. So I sort of thought, oh, crikey, did I do the right thing?
I think you made the right choice.
So.
Bruce Forsyth, I know you have met Bruce Forsyth, and of course he did the London Palladium nights, didn't he?
He did. When I was writing the book about Ulster Television, I wrote to him and said, I'm a lady taverner, and you get a little note of people who are taverners. So I had his address. So I wrote to him and said, I'm doing this. You visited UTV. You caused absolute mayhem, and it was brilliant. And I'd like to have a wee chat with you. Heard nothing. And after probably about 3 or 4 months, must have been summertime, because I know I was sitting with a friend in the garden, and Alan, my husband, waved the mobile phone and said, it's for you, it's Miller. And I said, who? It's Miller. I said, who is it? Bruce Forsyth. And I said, oh. And I said to George, sorry, Bruce Forsyth was on the phone. I was totally overcome then too. And he said, darling, I'm sorry. I've been away. I've only got your letter. What can I do for you?
Oh, how
and
lovely.
We had a long chat, and he gave me his mobile number and his home number. You know, like the higher up the tree you go, the more people are caring about you. And I said, I'm writing this, remember the day you were there. He didn't remember it, but shortly afterwards I was talking to Paddy Hopkirk, and he had won the Monte Carlo Rally, and I remember him coming into the studio and he said, you know, I was on the London Palladium last night with Bruce Forsyth. So I phoned Bruce back again and I said, do you remember the name Paddy Hopkirk? And he said, Paddy Hopkirk. He said, Monte Carlo Rally? And I said, yeah. He said, Mini Cooper? I said, Mini Cooper S? He said, yes, I remember. And he recalled the whole thing, and he said, yeah, there was a scream of brakes, and my man beside me on the stage said, I said, gosh, what's that? And he said, it's Paddy Hopkirk. He's just won the Monte Carlo Rally. And Paddy drove the car onto the stage.
Oh, my word.
And went on the roundabout with all the Tiller girls waving. And Paddy was just so excited about that. So there were 2 lovely stories that just happened within. I mean, everything is a big circle. It just comes round and round again.
And I know you've spoken about this before, and that's reflected, I suppose, in all that you've done in your career. You have a motto that you live by, and never say no. Well,
I think to say no closes doors. And that's the end of it. So don't say no. You may not want to. It may be an obvious no, but just say, let me think about it, or yes, I'll try it. I mean, I was sitting in a restaurant one day and the phone rang, and it was a guy from the Opera House and said, are you sitting down? And I said, I am, as it happened. He said, we want you to join the company for a summer pantomime. And I said, yeah, that would be lovely. And he said, do you not want to think about it? And I said, well, if you think I can do it, I'll have a go at it. Never been on stage before. And it turned out that I was working with
Lionel Blair.
Lionel
wasn't
Blair,
it? Yeah.
my hero. Lionel Blair went over to Islington for 2 weeks rehearsal, 2 weeks in the Opera House and 3 weeks in the Gaiety Theatre in Dublin. Yeah. And Lionel, like he came into the rehearsal. We were sitting in the 12th of July, sitting in the garden at the back of the Tower Theatre in Islington, and he came whirling in, all in white. Sorry, darling, sorry, late. I've parked the roller on double yellow lines, but I've put a message on saying, sorry, I'm late for rehearsal. I'll come and move the roller when I can. Love, Lionel. And I thought, I've got to crack this man. Mm-hmm. So I went up to him and I said, Lionel? And he said, yes. I said, I am your mother and I don't like you breaking the law like this. And he could have gone one of two ways. And he said, "Oh, Mummy, I'm so sorry." And from that moment on, and he got a parking ticket, by the way.
I'm sure he did.
But he would ring me even afterwards. I mean, he was superb because I didn't know what I was doing. But he worked with me and worked with me. And until he died, year before last, he would ring every Christmas morning.
Really?
He rang on Mother's Day. He rang throughout the year, and I would ring him. And he rang one day. He said, "Mummy, how do I make potato bread?" And I said, "Oh, son, I'll have to go and look. I'll phone you back." He was an
lovely.
absolute gentleman.
Oh, lovely.
And a thorough professional, of course, as well.
And he's just one of many, many names that you've worked with and are still working with. You're still writing a column in the Irish News.
Oh, yes.
Still blogging.
Oh, yes. And writing for magazines and speaking to groups and all sorts of things. I don't know what to be at next, Linda.
How do you come up with topics to write about for your weekly column?
Well, they're all around me. Keep your eyes and ears open. Always listen to people who might have a story. I might come to you and say, "Could you cover that for me?" You know, I always see myself, and probably any journalist, as a conduit between getting the message out and hearing what the question is. Therefore, never ignore your audience, because they are much more important than you are. So there's stories. If I don't get a story every day, I've failed. And everybody's got a story.
Everybody has a story.
And that's whenever I go out talking, I say to everybody, write it down. Yeah. Write down your past. If you're a grandparent, write it for your grandchildren. Because that's all living history. Everything is living history. So it's got to be recorded.
Everybody has a story, and yours is an absolutely fascinating one. And it's been lovely to speak to you. Thank you so much for telling us all about it.
It's been a great pleasure, Linda. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you for that, Anne Hailes, and we're going to take a break. Be back in a moment.
Heading to the North Coast? The Jet Centre in Coleraine offers entertainment for everyone. There's an 8-screen movie house cinema with all the best movies, 10-pin bowling, a massive arcade, soft play for the wee ones. Outdoors, there's a mini fun park and gem mining, plus an 18-hole floodlit mini golf course. Rain or shine, there's something for everyone here at the Jet Centre. Find out more at thejetcentre.co.uk.
Hello and welcome back. My next guest is another journalist. In fact, she could be described as a powerhouse of journalism, breaking some of the biggest stories Northern Ireland has ever seen. She is Jilly Beattie. Jilly, thank you so much for joining me.
You're welcome, Linda.
You've just finished 30 years at the Daily Mirror. Does it seem like that long?
No, it has flown.
Yeah.
It has flown. Best years. Absolutely amazing. And just made some fantastic friends along the way, broken some great big stories along the way, and helped a lot of people. But when I got to the 8th of November last year, and I realised that was 30 years, I don't know where they've gone.
No, surely some mistake, yes?
Surely.
and breaking some of the biggest stories, not least, I mean, the most recent one, I suppose, is the Jeffrey Donaldson case. I know it's a live case, we're limited to what we can say, but how did you come to get that one?
Well, Linda, as you know, as a professional journalist, you can't reveal your sources. And with this case, really, I can't reveal anything on that at all. But suffice to say, I managed to break the story on the 28th of March. And we were expecting the court case, the trial, to start on around the 25th of March this year. So there was a long run-in to breaking of the story. And then the choice had to be made as to whether I break the story before the police have done their work, or we wait until the police case is concluded to that degree. And of course, morally and ethically, I couldn't have messed up that. So I just had to sit and wait out what needed to be waited out. And then, fortunately, I was in a position where I was able to work out that that 2 people had been released after being arrested and charged, and had been released from Antrim Police Station on the 20th of March. And we published that night at I think it was like 10 minutes to midnight, ahead of the Good Friday. And of course we weren't able to mention who had been arrested or who had been charged because of the protections in place for the alleged victims and the alleged perpetrators. But at the same time, there had been a flurry of activity around one of the individuals, and then within 12 hours the DUP had come out and said that Jeffrey Donaldson had in fact been charged with what they described as historic charges.
Which confirmed everything that you had known.
Yeah.
You talked about ethics. The ethics is such a massive part of journalism these days, isn't it?
It always has been. And really, I think it's down to each individual journalist to know where their moral code lies and where their standards are within the ethics system. But also it lies within the newsroom. And sometimes within the speed of journalism that can get lost. But as a journalist, you've got to keep your feet planted firmly on the ground. You've got to build really strong foundations to start with. I think you have to have a personal moral code that is personal to you, that can also work within the journalistic sphere. And if you lose touch with it or you lose contact with it, you're in big trouble. You can get into really big trouble. And also it's very difficult when you have editors shouting and screaming, and in the days that when we were the age of some of the students that we have here today, when we were that age, there was a lot of shouting, there was a lot of smoking, there was a lot of all sorts of stuff in the newsrooms. Today everything's much more delicate and much more nicely done.
There's a lot of bad behaviour in those days in a newsroom that
Linda,
would have you hauled up to HR these days.
We better not get into that, of course. Some of the stuff that went on was crazy. But those pressures still exist today with less volume. So you'll be under pressure from your editor. Your editor's under pressure from their boss. Their bosses are under pressure very often from the CEOs, and the CEOs are under pressure from the shareholders. So the pressures exist. There's just less volume.
Tell me about another of the big stories you broke, Jim McCafferty.
Well, I'll never forget. That was incredible. So that was actually November 2016. We received an email from our colleagues at the Daily Record in Scotland and said, can you go and find Jim McCafferty? We've had a call to say that he inappropriately sexually assaulted somebody, a young man.
So he was associated with Celtic youth team.
Well, we didn't know I didn't personally know who he was. That's just what we got in, and they said he was the kit man and coach of the Celtic youth team, and that was it. So we got back to them and said, well, whereabouts is he? In Northern Ireland? And they said, well, he's not in Scotland. And we were like,
that was it.
Okay. So those are the kind of clues you get about these things. So Maurice Fitzmaurice, who was my news editor at the time, phoned and said, Jilly, can you go and bang the door. Basically, the bang the door is the code for you need to go and ask this guy what he's legally entitled to be told that you're investigating about him. So I said, well, where is he? And nobody knew where he was. So I was like, right, okay. So I contacted Alan Lewis, who was working with us as a photographer, brilliant photographer, years and years of experience, and he can get round any corner. And I said, Alan, I think we have a job here. We need a pot of tea. So Alan and I did everything over a pot of tea. And I went to the Belmont Road in Belfast, and I just sat down. Something came over me when I looked at who this guy was. I thought he has had years of access to young footballers in Celtic and other teams, Hibs and all sorts of teams. And I thought to myself, oh, right, okay. I thought I got that. It was like, I don't know if you've ever had that kind of feeling in work, Linda, where you've got that, you just know. Mm-hmm. You just know. I knew I would find him. I hadn't a clue where he was. I knew I'd find him. I knew I'd get access to him. And I knew that I would get him to tell me the truth.
How did you find him then?
Well, we sat down with a very large pot of tea and said, where would a paedophile go in Belfast? I think, well, what a place to start. It's okay. We had the clues. Footballer. He was really very, very much still involved with Celtic. And we're thinking, where would somebody who is involved in this kind of life want to see young people playing football? And the team at the time, and probably still is today, was up round the Ormer Road area. So we went to the Ormer Road and I banged on doors. I went to the post office, I went to cafes, just banged on a few doors, and I said, do you know a man called Jim McCafferty, who's a former Celtic involvement with Celtic? And they said, he lives in the Curzon Flats, the old Curzon Flats.
Oh my word.
Number 54 or
so
whatever.
So you have to be a real detective, don't you?
Well, you have to have an instinct, and you have to have the gumption to go and ask people questions. You're never, if you don't ask, you won't get. And if you don't ask people questions, you won't get any answers. But if you do ask people questions, you'd be very surprised what people will tell you.
Wow.
We went and buzzed the buzzer. We got in, we got up in the lift. He came down on a rollator from the third or fourth floor. And I had been talking to him on the intercom and said, Jim, I would like to talk to you about safeguarding within football. Because at that time there was a lot of stuff going on around some Chelsea players had been coming out to say that they had been hurt as children as well, young people. So we talked to him openly about that. And but when I walked into his flat, it was really neat, really nice flat, and he had everything just sitting. He had a stack of £50 notes that he was going through on his kitchen table, and he was writing Christmas cards. And I thought, this doesn't look like the home of what you would imagine a paedophile might look like. But I looked round, and he was an older gentleman, and he had his comfy armchair. And to the left of that armchair against the wall was a stack of Daily Record newspapers. And I just thought, something just drew me to that. And I thought, there's something about that stack of newspapers. And when it was like an absolute moment of clarity, because any sportsman will read the paper back to front. You start at the back
Sports pages first.
Sports pages first. Well, when I was trying to work out what he had folded the paper over, but it was obvious from the curl of the paper that he'd be reading it front to back. And I said to him, Jim, do you read the Daily Record? He goes, oh yes, I read the Daily Record. And I said, do you not read the sports pages first? And he said, oh no. And I said, well, what are you looking for, Jim, in the paper? Oh, just this and that, he said. And I thought, you're looking for yourself in there.
Wow.
And he admitted later on, he got the Daily Record because every day he scoured that paper to see if there was a paragraph about him, because he had been on the run from his demons for 50 years. He had been investigated by 3 Scottish police services and endless media. And he had always just skirted in under those investigations.
Good grief. So
and that curled newspaper really was my cue. I thought, I have you here.
So it's one of those times where your instinct told you something, and your experience and all of that put it together, and you got the story.
I think so, Linda. There are clues about everybody and everything, and I was looking. We had in our head that he was guilty. You know, you go in and you're not meant to judge and you're not meant to have these feelings, but what had been said to our colleagues in Scotland was very, very difficult. And I thought, who would phone a paper up and make that up? Anyway, he was given his opportunity to give me his version of events, and in the end, after 54 minutes in that flat, he said, well, yes, I suppose you could call me a paedophile.
Wow, good grief.
So we left then. Al and I went for another pot of tea, a bit shaken, not shaken, but a bit dumbfounded by the fact that he just literally eventually come out and said this. And Jim McCafferty phoned me within 17 minutes and said, Jilly, his words were, Jilly, I haven't been entirely honest with you, can you come back? And we went back and spent 3 or 4 hours with a full confessional.
Wow.
And he
What a
was
story,
jailed.
hey?
He was jailed. He was taken into police custody the next morning and jailed in Northern Ireland for crimes over in Northern Ireland, and then spirited off to Scotland and jailed in Scotland, and he died there a year and a half ago.
We haven't got a huge amount of time left, but I want to talk to you. But I know your journalism has taken you abroad. You went to Mauritius to cover the Michaela McAreevy trial, but you've also been very involved in the search for Lisa Dorian.
Yeah, yes, that's very close to my heart. You know, the family have become very close to my heart. You know, sadly we broke that story. And it was a very difficult time. I'd had contact from the police, official contact from the police, to say they were escalating the case of a missing person to a murder trial, or to a murder investigation rather. And we agreed, yes, we would get this off the front page because we hoped that we would pull some information from the public. We published it off the front page, but we didn't know at the time, and the police who told me this didn't know this obviously at the time, was that the police had not contacted the Dorian family. So John Dorian, who is Lisa's dad, had been down to the garage to collect some papers, and he flipped over the Daily Mirror, and there he saw his worst nightmare really on the front of the Daily Mirror. So a message was given to me, and I went down to see the family, and I had to explain to them in the most awful terms what had happened, and it was horrendous. It was horrendous. There was a lack of communication within the police, amongst the police, but also the assumption from the police that we would do this, which we said we would, and then our assumption that the police would have the investigation explained to the family. So a very, very difficult start, a very difficult situation for them at all.
But you and the Dorian family have become very close. I know
we've
that,
been teammates for 20 years, and nearly 20 years next month actually.
Compassion is so important in journalism, and there's an example of it right there.
Well, Linda, I just think, people say, there's a difference between being tough and resilient to being hard. And you can be tough and resilient in journalism while you have compassion. But you can't, to my mind, being hard doesn't work for me. And if you lose your resilience, and if you lose your toughness, and you lose your compassion, you've no place in journalism. You have to keep the compassion because it's about people.
Well, your journalism has been recognised by the prestigious Society of Editors, hasn't it? Just in November there?
In November,
what did you win?
Yes. Journalist of the Year.
Wow,
yeah,
amazing.
I was pleased.
That must be a great way to finish your 30 years.
Well,
at the
this is it. It was a
Mirror.
few days after I left the Daily Mirror, 35 years after I started in journalism, and it will buoy me as I continue on this road in journalism. I'm doing writing. I've been commissioned for a couple of books and 3 documentaries, and I get time to walk my dogs.
Yes, the dogs are very important to you, aren't they?
And spend more time with my poor husband, Peter. So it's been a fantastic career. I would advise anybody that has an interest in people to have a look at it. But don't forget, keep the compassion, because that's your greatest strength.
Well, you may have left the Daily Mirror and that whole career there behind you, but certainly the future is going to be equally busy for you, I'd imagine, Jilly.
Absolutely. They want me back, actually, to continue on with the Jeffrey Donaldson court case when that comes up this year. And anything else. It's nice to leave on a good note within my business, within the career, and we'll have to see how the land lies with all those court cases that are coming up.
And we wish you really well with it,
Thanks,
Jilly.
Linda.
Thank you so much
Thank
for
you so
talking
much.
to me today. Thank you for watching the programme too. Until next time, bye-bye.